Well, hello and welcome, and thank you for coming to listen to us this afternoon. As Neil said, I'm Sarah Richards, and Eva and I work with various organisations training and implementing lean process improvement. And our plan this afternoon is to take you through A3 problem solving, which is one of the lean tools that we train quite frequently. So one of the first questions people always ask is, what is A3 problem solving? And it's very simply a way of managing your whole process improvement project on one piece of paper. And whenever we say this, project managers look a bit scared and roll their eyes. But the first thing people normally say is, how big is the piece of paper and how small is the font? Well, I'll tell you now, it's size A3. And it's A3 because Toyota, who developed this, back in the day when they developed this, A3 was the largest size piece of paper they could get through a fax machine. And at the time they were faxing things around. So that's why it's written on one sheet of A3. But because it's written on one sheet of A3, just one piece of paper, don't think by any means that this isn't an incredibly robust piece of work. And it's robust because it takes you in a structured way through Plan, Do, Check, Act. And Plan, Do, Check, Act is a structured approach to problem solving. And each step builds on the one before. So there's no missing steps. So it's that very important 4-step approach. And the most important thing about using this approach is that it holds us back from rushing into fixing problems when we don't fully understand the problems. So it stops us doing that. There's no skipping steps. It's a very structured approach. So I'll take you quickly through Plan, Do, Check, Act. You may be familiar with it, I don't know, but I'll just give a whistle-stop tour around Plan, Do, Check, Act. So the first stage is planning. And this is when you work to fully understand what it is you're trying to fix. And although this is shown as like a quarter, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eva, whenever we do projects, we normally spend about 75% of our time on the planning. So when I said you were going to be prevented from rushing through, I really mean you are going to be prevented from rushing through. And so this is the stage when you sit down and say, first of all, what is it that we're trying to achieve? What is the problem? And it stops us saying, I've got a solution, what's the problem? You need to understand how the whole thing hangs together at the moment. You need to understand root cause, and only then can you move on to deciding what you're going to do. So the planning stage is a substantial part of this. And only once you've got to that stage can then you decide what you're going to do and fully implement it. The check stage is when you go back over your A3, you go back over your project, and you just want to understand at this stage, have the results given you what you expected to get? And you will only know that if you started measuring. So at the plan stage, you have to decide what is it that you're going to measure throughout this project. In the doing stage, you need to make sure that you're actually collecting that data. And at the end of the project, you can analyze that and see, was it worth doing, yes or no? And finally, you act on those results. So that's Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is a very robust approach to project planning. So now we know what Plan, Do, Check, Act is, I will show you an example of an A3 template. Now, this is the template that Eva and I use. I'm sure if you Google them, there's thousands of different types. This is the one we've been using for the last few years because it's very clean, it's very easy to understand. And so this is how we've approached it. First of all, if you're not familiar with A3, I'll just explain how you read an A3. If you imagine it like a book, so if you were to fold it down the long edge here, if you were to fold it in half, you work on the top left and down, then you move to the top right and move down. So the first thing you'd want to do is put in the title of the project you're looking at and then write in the names of the team members. Then the problem and the goal statement. Now, I'm a qualified business analyst, and when I first looked at something like this, the idea of only putting a problem statement in something so small was a bit strange. But the idea is that this is very punchy. And this is exactly what is the problem, what are we trying to fix, and what's it going to look like when we fixed it. So this only needs to be a couple of sentences. Once you've done that, you're going to move on to the current state. And the current state is literally, what does the process look like at the moment? And once you've identified your process, and normally in the current state, we're now looking at a process map or a flow chart. And when you do that, you're going to get all sorts of problems and issues raised. Once you've identified those, you want to do some root cause analysis to understand what exactly is causing all those issues. And after this section, I'll go through all these sections in a little bit more detail. So we've got what the problem is about, what the process looks like at the moment, and what's causing all of the issues. And only then are you able to start fixing. So on the left-hand side is all about what's it like now. And then we move to this bit. And in here, we're going to put another process map of this is what it's going to be like when we fixed it. This section here is an implementation plan, which is literally, this is what it looks like at the moment. This is what we want to move it to look like, and what are the actions we need to do to move one to the other. A crucial part of this is measuring. What exactly are we going to measure, and who's going to measure it? And here we only want measures that are going to tell you how well you're doing or not. And then finally, next steps. So once you've completed this, you have gone through Plan, Do, Check, Act, because all this area is planning what change you're going to make. Implementation stage is the actual going out and doing it. Your check stage is when you get hold of all your measures, you get hold of your data, and you see whether or not it was worth doing, what's been the impact of the change. And then knowing that, what you're going to do next. So you've got Plan, Do, Check, Act on the one sheet of paper. So what I'm going to go now, I'm just going to go down into a little bit more detail about what we put in each of these areas. At the end, I'll also put a little bit more in the meat on the bones as to why it's only one sheet and why it's only small. There's a very good reason for not allowing you to write War and Peace on this. So when it comes to problem statements, what we try here is get it as clean and concise and tight as you possibly can. Once we get things like, well, it doesn't work that well, or it needs just to get a bit better, or higher, faster, it's got to be tight, because if this part of your project is woolly, you've got no chance going forward. So this has to be really clear and concise. So when we do this, we get a team together and we just put these questions down. What is the problem? Who is affected by it? What is the impact? So like, so what? And what is the desired goal? And this normally takes us, an hour and a half with a team, because depending on the size of your project, because people will be seeing this problem from different sides. So we just start off, and sometimes we just put any statement down that people come up with, and then they can pick the bones out of that. So the problem is, it affects, the impact is, and the desired goal. Remember, on your A3, you've only got a small area to write this. So here's an example that we put together in true Blue Peter form. So here we've got, it takes 42 working days to process an expenses form, and we receive on average 2,100 a month. This generates 600 calls per month from staff chasing payment, and it takes the finance team 50 hours per month to deal with these calls. So in 2 or 3 sentences, you've captured what the problem is. Basically, it's taking too long in people's eyes to process an expenses form. And because of that, it's generating all this non-value work that people have to do. So very clear what the problem is. And the desired goal is the staff would like payment within 10 working days of submission. So very clearly, you know what the problem is, what it's causing, and where we'd like this to go. Okay. So once we know that, and we've got that clear, and so by now everyone is on the same page, how does this look right now? So here we'd be looking at a process map for how we process expenses claims. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with process mapping, but the way we would do it, we would put a piece of brown paper on the wall and we would just get Post-its, and you're just taking people through what happens next from beginning to end. So understand where the process starts and where the process ends, and then map it with your team. And the people who do this are the people who work on the process. This isn't something that an outsider comes, sits and looks at people with a stopwatch. It isn't about that at all. It's about the people who do the work every day, fixing their own piece of work. So people would be doing this now with stickies. And the way we would do it, we'd use one colour sticky for tasks and then a separate colour Post-its for issues. And we generally find that they cluster in certain places. So here you'd be identifying here, these are the main issues around this problem. But once you've identified those issues, it's now what you're going to do with it. And before you move along onto fixing it, this is the crucial part. Understand what's causing all these problems. And this is where we do the root cause analysis part. And this is about not plastering over cracks. It's really drilling down to understand what's happening. So yeah, and this is what we call mop it or stop it. So if you've got water gushing out of a tap endlessly, you can either spend all day, every day mopping it, or you spend a little more time fixing the tap. So it's drilling down, and there's two ways we do this. We do it either with the Fivewise technique, or we use cause and effect. I'll take you through both of those now. So again, you might be familiar with these techniques. The Fivewise technique, again, this was developed by Toyota, and they call it Fivewise because in their experience, by asking why 5 times, you would get to the root cause. You might get there in 3 or 4 or 7. It's not terribly important, but it's the fact that you're constantly asking why. So again, when we do this, we would write the issue on a piece of flip, and then we ask the team, why does this happen? And each question will, and every answer will generate the next question. Because. Why does that happen? Because. Why does that happen? Because. Until you get down to the root cause. And once you get to the nub of the issue, that's the reason, that's the issue you need to tackle in order to get rid of this problem. The other approach is a cause and effect diagram, which is generally called a fishbone diagram because it looks like the skeleton of a fish. And to put this together, draw a line on a piece of paper, horizontal line, and in the head of the fish, you put the effect. So here, if we go back to our example of the processing the expenses claims, we'd be saying here, it's taking 42 days to process an expenses form, and it's causing the following. Now here, we've done 6 lines coming off the fish. You could do 5 or 4. Again, these aren't written in stone. These are for you to adapt. And again, you need to identify your own primary causes. We've put 6 here. We've put materials, systems, equipment, environment, processes, and people. And once you've got those, again, you're almost doing a 5 whys on each spine. So if, for example, we go back to our example on the expenses form, and somebody was saying, the problem is it's people, because people like to blame people. That's where we normally start. It's people. And you say, what's happening? The people in the team aren't processing them right. So the next question is, why aren't they processing them correctly? Because they've not been trained. Why have they not been trained? We've had a change to the system and no one's written any new guidance. Why has no one written any guidance? Because nobody's been tasked with doing it. So that's the problem. No one's been tasked. So it's, again, you're doing 5 whys on the issues that you come out. And if I'm quite honest, I prefer using this diagram to the previous 5 whys, because generally the projects that we're working on, there's more than one cause to the problem. So this lets you see on one page all the issues got and what's causing everyone. Hope that makes sense. And it's only at that stage can we now start to think, how do we fix this? And at this stage, we'd be looking to map a future state. But before then, Eva and I it's just 3 questions, but we find it so helpful in focusing the mind. And here we just put up 3 sheets of flip chart paper. On each one, we put one of these questions. What does excellence look like now? And especially when you're working with a group of people and it's all about the problems, you need to kind of lift people's eyes to what it could be. And although we've already said in our problem statement where we want to be, it just gets you out of that problem frame of mind. So the first one is, if it was excellent and we've got no barriers, what would this actually look like? And we just write down what people say. What would this be like? Even things like, I wouldn't go home crying every night. We write down, what would this be? After that is generally a time to have a cup of tea because people have really thought of that. Then after that, we say, right, you've articulated what excellent looks like. So why can't you just go back in tomorrow morning and make it excellent? And this is when you get because. Now, this will pick up a lot of what's come out in that fishbone diagram, but it'll also pick up some other things about culture and this sort of thing. The third question then we ask is, right, you've articulated excellence. You've explained to us why you can't be excellent now. So what do we need to do? And here we want verbs. So this is where you're going to get your list of actions. We need to do this. But when you look at all of these, the likelihood is you're not going to be able to tackle everything because unfortunately we do have limited resource, time, people, the vision of the organisation. So once you've looked at this is when your team would decide and prioritise what is it that we can do. And from an A3 point of view, we're looking at what could be achieved within the next 3 to 4 weeks. And then you redo your process map from beginning to end, bearing in mind where you want to go, what all the root causes are, what we think excellent could be, and then you're going to come up with a process that is implementable. I think that's a word. Is it implementable? Well, it would be. Once you've done that, is setting about your action plan. So you're going to have one process map, which is your current state. And now you've developed a shorter, you hope, future state map, which has taken out some of the issues, the problems, and the wastes that you'll have had in your first map. And all you need to do then is write down all the tasks to move from the current to the future. And this doesn't have to be on a complicated Gantt chart. This could just be, what is the task? Who's going to do it? And when's it going to be done by? And by who, we mean who in this team is going to be responsible for getting that done? Because I don't believe in giving people tasks when they're not at a meeting. So this team, who's going to be responsible for getting that done? And something else you have to remember here as well is don't forget to allocate someone to gather the data. Depending on your process, you might just be pressing a button at the end and it's all generated from systems, in which case it's fine. But if you're doing a trial of this new process, you might be wanting people to just record some data as they go along. So don't forget to put on here, who is collecting the data, what are they collecting and when? And one of the last parts here on the A3 is the measures. And this is about measuring success. Because as we've said here, if you don't have data to back up your project, you've just got people's opinions. People may say, yes, it feels better. No, it doesn't feel better. You really need to have some solid evidence. Because it might be now you want to take this and do something more with it, and you're going to be asking for a considerable amount of finance. You need to show here that this effort has been worth it. And secondly, we put, but measures have to reflect the purpose of your actions. So often we get involved in projects where people have so many measures, and it's nothing to do with what they're doing, but we measure it because we can. Only measure what you need to measure. So again, going back to our example, right, we knew it took 42 working days, and we know it's generating 600 calls, and we know the finance team is taking 50 hours. So what we need to measure now is how many working days are we now processing them in? How many calls are now being generated? and how much time is it taking the finance team to manage this. So you don't want hundreds, you just want the ones you need to show how you're progressing. And one of the reasons we put here, measures, not targets. If you were to target people with, and we want you to be on 10-day turnaround within 3 weeks, quite often things get fiddled, things get missed, and people might get a lower standard of service, but people will do everything they can to hit a target. It isn't a case of putting a target, it's a measure so that we can understand if what we're doing is working or not. And the final stage, once you've implemented, is to look at it at the end and say, did you get the results that you expected? And if you did, which we hope you do, how are you now going to stabilize that change? So do you need to update processes and procedures? Do you need to do some training? It might be that you've done this in a trial area, you now want to spread it out. How are you going to do that? So remember that Plan, Do, Check, Act is continuous improvement. So it's what are you going to do next? If the answer, if the answer is no, the worst thing you can do is say, well, we didn't think it would work, let's just abandon it. It isn't that. It's about going back and understanding. And the good thing about it, looking at an A3, it's easy to go back and understand why something hasn't worked. Now, it could be that when you map the process, you missed a piece out that you weren't aware of. It could be that you've done your root cause analysis, but you didn't quite go far enough, so you're actually only fixing a symptom. It could be that, do you know, there were 6 options and we've chosen one and it hasn't worked. But this isn't a case of this is wrong, it's not worked. It's a case of learning what does work. So we chose option A, we've learned that that's not the option, we're now going to try B. It's this continuing learning, collaborative learning. Now I'm going to cover the bit as to why it's only an A3 and why it's not massive. So bear with me. Here, I don't know whether you can see this, but this is somebody who's considerably braver than me, climbing what looks like a pretty horrific rock face. But when that person set out, they know exactly where they're going. They want to get to the top. But that doesn't mean we're going in one nice straight line, step, 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 step. Here, it looks like this person's moving to the left anyway. And so all this person can do at the moment is, in order to get up, they're working out how are they going to do this very short space. That's their detailed map. So their compass is on true north, but their detailed map is only for this short bit here. And that's what happens with A3. We think of A3s as you might have a huge project to do, but your A3 is that constant next step, because it's very difficult, nigh on impossible, to put a detailed plan for the next 5 years, because we're planning into the dark. We don't know what's changing. We only have to look at what's happening in COVID to see how things can spin on a halfpenny. So our vision and our compass is where we want to be. So as an organisation, we've got our vision, we know where we're planning to get to, but we want some very short plans on how do we start making these footholds. So your A3 would be your next couple of weeks, very, very detailed project plan. And then when you finish that, you'd do your next project plan. And if it's on the same project, you've done your current state map, you've now got a future state map, which you've implemented. So when you do your next A3 in Plan, Do, Check, Act, your future state is now actually your current state, and you keep on going. So your vision, true north, is your compass. Your detailed maps are quite short. And that's why the A3 is the size it is, because if you can't fit your project on a sheet of A3, you've bitten off more than you can chew. Also bear in mind the size of your business. People are normally doing this over and above their day job. And when it gets too onerous and too big and no one's seeing anything happening, it tends to lull and fade away. This way, people are seeing improvements constantly. So if after a couple of weeks, so we did one with an IT company a little while ago, and they were on their 5th A3, all going really well. We met them, head in their hands, absolute despair. This one has been a disaster. We expected A, we've got B. And we're saying that's not a disaster. What would have been a disaster is if you've been planning this for 4 years and then you find the world has changed. What you've learned is that wasn't the route to choose. That should have been, they then changed their path. and they moved again. So these things aren't a disaster if you don't get the results you wanted. It's showing you, it's learning what works in the future. And again, it's all about continuous incremental improvement, and A3 map will take you incrementally through. So final thoughts. It's one sheet of paper, one sheet of A3. They are deceptively simple. What's important is we keep emphasizing, it isn't the document itself, it's that thought process and dialogue that team goes through to get that improvement. It has to be collaborative. Do not do this sitting on your own in an office. This is how everybody learns. Everyone's learning how the organization works. They're learning how their piece of work has an impact on someone else. We're learning this, and we're learning plan, do, check, act. Fourth point here is it makes communication and sharing good practice so much easier. If you want to show somebody what you've done and you're showing them a massive, huge 20,000 word report full of henceforth and notwithstanding, they're probably not going to look at it. Whereas if you're showing them one sheet of paper and you're taking them through your plan, do, check, act, it's very easy to understand, and we don't believe it insults anybody's intelligence to make things as simple as possible and make sure that everyone understands it. And finally, it will really develop you as a problem solver, and it will really help you develop other people as problem solvers. And it's so much easier then when people have a problem. Talk me through your A3. It's a really good coaching and mentoring technique. Talk me through your A3, how you're doing. And after a while, you won't tell people, here's your A3. They'd be thinking A3. They'd be thinking plan, do, check, act. And they'll stop rushing headlong into expensive changes that aren't going to help. But that's all we've got to say. Here's a few. We've just got some completed ones that, apologies, are not great. They were just some photographs that I took of A3s that people have done in the past. So this one, I'm looking at it, it's quite heavily and wordy. I remember that one. It was about the admissions process for postgrad students. Here's another one here where you can see someone's done a cause and effect diagram. And again here, but you know, it doesn't have to be as smart as this. I mean, we've done these in Visio or Miro and imported it. You don't have to. You can write this with pencil and a sheet of paper. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It's not about making this look smart and presentable. It's about everybody being on the same page and achieving something at the end. Well, that's all I've got to say about it. So if you want to move on to QAs now, I'm saying if anyone's got Qs, even I will try and do the As.
Hey, brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. That was really insightful and useful. And certainly I find it, as someone who I consider myself a problem solver, but I also tend to I can get to head down sometimes. So it's really useful to have these tools. One thing I was going to ask is going back to that fishbone, and sorry, what I should say actually is if anyone has any questions, just please bung them in the chat now, and we'll get to them very shortly. But I'll start off. The fishbone diagram, that's very good at surfacing all these causes, all these whys. But I was wondering, how do you bring all of those causes into one cohesive thing to solve? What's the process that you go through and go, okay, so it's partly to do with accounts doing this, and it's partly to do with manufacturing side doing that, and it's partly to do with, you know, cash flow or whatever that happens to be. How do you bring that into something that's cohesive enough that you can come up with a strategy to solve it, rather than just having to individually pick off all these, you know, I mean, which again itself is a valid strategy, of course.
Yeah. Quite often what we find is there's so many of these are different sides of the same issue. So you'll have, it's people. What is the issue? We've had a new system. So we've had a new IT system. Then you look on the IT side and it's saying, oh, the problem is we've had a new IT system. So quite often you can start to see that these link hugely. And then we pick out the key ones from this. Some of these as well, there's quite a bit of work that we do behind the scenes, which would be, some of these will be very small things. What we need to do is we need to stop filling in the green form. Another one will be, we need a new IT system. So these are so far apart.
Yeah.
So we normally, I hate the term low hanging fruit, but that is what you want. You want to, what could you do really easily? And some of these things you can implement with no cost whatsoever, because a lot of it is we need to stop doing stuff that we don't need to do. So there'll be that side. Then there'll be other things then that we'll normally get about, say, 20 things that we need to do. If that's a large project, if it's smaller, it'll be smaller. And then a lot of these can be grouped. And then those that can't be grouped, we'll go through an analysis with a team of what's the most important, depends on money. There's all sorts of reasons that what can be implemented. But we're normally looking to say, what can we do pretty soon?
The other thing that we quite often do as well is within the team, we will ask them to vote. So we'll give them, 3 votes each. And you can see they're usually heavily clustered in one area. And those really good wins, because those are things that mean the most. So especially if you've given them 3 votes and they put all 3 dots in one place, that's causing a lot of pain for somebody. Therefore, we can prioritise the list fairly quickly, knock off the things at the top. And you've probably done yourself things like Pareto and stuff where you a number of things are causing a lot of impacts. So once we pick off those big things, sometimes the little things fall into place, or they're not issues anymore. So they may not be one cohesive thing, but by picking away at them, we can make sure that we're still working towards that same goal.
And I suppose that's where the iterative thing comes in, right? It's not a once and done process, right? You're very much advocating for an ongoing iterative process.
Yeah. Absolutely. And as Eva was saying about the dot voting, sometimes there'll be different reasons for doing things. Like we've done things before, we've gone into an organisation and they cannot get people to get engaged. And so if one of the things that a team wants, it may not be high priority, but if having a water machine is going to really change things here, let's do that. So it depends really where their vision is. But as Eva says, things cluster. We give people 3 sticky dots and you can guarantee they're going to be clustered.
And that also ensures the engagement, as Sarah said, because what happens then is those people that have voted for that, they really have an interest in getting that. They chose that, they'll get it done, and we're very much there as guidance. We help people do the job that they're already doing. We're not there to say you must do this, you must do that. We work with them to help them to get through the quagmire, because usually they're all very capable people, and it's just that there's just too much going on, and sometimes they just need a little bit of space just to work things out.
Yeah, that's really useful actually to clarify that. I have another question actually that I'll come back to in a second. Just if anyone else has any questions, pop them in the chat now. In the meantime, I've actually put links in the chat to if you're not already signed up for our weekly updates, then by all means you can sign up there, and a link to a couple of upcoming events we have over the next couple of weeks. So you highlighted that sort of 5 whys thing, which is a tool I use quite a lot when mentoring early stage businesses, and also helping those businesses that are developing new products, because sometimes I feel like companies develop new products and services for the wrong reasons, right? They're picking they take a signal from a customer to mean that they have to develop a certain product and or service, and actually they haven't understood the root cause, the root pain that the customer's feeling, and addressing that directly. So that sort of leads me to the question of, is this process useful for product development as well as problem solving? Can you use it for, addressing issues around what do we do next? It may not necessarily be anything fundamentally wrong, but it might be, okay, so we want to add X, Y, and Z to our portfolio of products, or we want to move into this direction. It seems to me it's almost like the business model canvas, which is not dissimilar in sort of taking
it's very similar,
piece of paper to define an entire business model. So how would you be able to use this process for something like product development or business development?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it focuses your thinking so that you understand why you're taking that next step. And I think it really clarifies that. And as you say, on companies developing new products, it's that, why are you doing it? isn't it? And understanding. So it's not just for fixing problems. I mean, Fivewise can be used for all sorts of things as you use for. No, it isn't just for problem solving.
Okay, no, that's really good to know, and it's quite interesting. I think as for those of us who are the sort of company directors within the room, or sort of the founders of businesses, I think it's very easy to fall in love with your own product and lose sight of the customer problem, right? And it's certainly a problem I face with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs who've sort of been, they've read a lot of blogs about, go out and crush it, and they kind of believe that they've got a brilliant idea, but they're, actually asking those hard questions of them helps them understand, or at least understand that it needs to be customer focused rather than falling in love with their own product and their own brilliance. And all entrepreneurs have an ego. I've certainly made the mistake myself in the past of being convinced that my vision is brilliant because I've read too many blogs about Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. And okay. It doesn't look like we have any questions coming in. So is there anything else you wanted? Oh, hang on, we've got something from James Moore just on cue. So you appreciate the idea of an iterative process and the simplicity of an A3 sheet. Is there a digital service for ongoing product development? And so the team might be able to see progress made continuously. So I suppose the thing about an A3 sheet is great, but actually, particularly at the moment, that's a very relevant question because we can't all get around the table in the meeting room and with a pen and paper, right? So is there a way to undertake this process digitally and collaboratively?
Yes, and I think everyone's just had to, haven't they, during COVID? We use Miro, which is a collaborative tool, and we use that. And yes, it works fine. It does work fine. I'll be quite honest, as a consultant who comes into an organisation, I must admit I like to be in there, and I look forward to the day when we can do that. So I think, especially as coming in as an outsider, you want to roll up your sleeves and get involved. I mean, what we do is we take people through an A3 over about 3 days. So we actually take them through the process and do it with them. And then you want to be, as I said, sleeves rolled up and getting involved. But yes, we are doing it on Miro.
Okay. And I've put the link to that in the chat, by the way, for anyone interested. And what would you suggest then would be the next step for anybody here who wants to engage their team or undertake this process either on their own or with the team? How do you foster engagement? Because I think that's one of the things that I've struggled with in the past is getting everyone engaged at the same time. Because I having a big chat with my co-founders of my business at the moment. We have to make some significant changes to some certain elements of our business, and finding us all with the right time, resources, and energy and focus is difficult. So how do you get everyone to the table? What's that first step? Is it just an email? Is it a phone call? Is it a group call? How do you normally do this?
I think sometimes the right time to do it is now, because there never is a perfect time when everything's aligned. It's like, when's the perfect time to have a baby, isn't it? I don't think things are ever aligned completely in that sense. And I think you're just going to say, let's just do it now. And I think the thing about lean is that the reason we were so attracted to lean, and that's why we endorse lean, is that the fundamental thing about lean is respect for people. And it's, and one of the most respectful things you can do to your people is allow them to understand the problems they have in work and allow them to fix their own problems rather than do that for them. But I think sometimes you find something that isn't necessarily the most pressing, urgent problem, although that's very, very good for getting people to focus. It's finding something that's niggling and working through something fairly small with a group of people, and they can actually see for themselves that it works. And I think it's that sprat to catch a mackerel, isn't it? Let's do something and take people through the process, because they do want proof that this actually works, because there have been so many things that we've been sold in the past. So I think it's that finding something that everybody wants to fix and work on one thing. Ideally, we'd work from the top, we'd develop the vision, we'd work out how we're going to do that, what each team is doing, right down to individuals. But sometimes you've just got to start where you can start. And we've gone into places where there's a keen group, and we'll work with a keen group, and then it grows.
Yeah, I suppose that's a wider team culture point as well, isn't it? But yes, I think there's normally at least one issue within a business that everyone or the majority.
The problem that we have is usually when we get called, something has gone wrong, and there's this sense of urgency to get it done, and that's not always the best time when you're firefighting. It's a really bad time to do it, although there is a lot of enthusiasm to get it done quickly. So it swings and roundabouts, really. If you can get into places that are mature enough, that have a little bit of space to think forward, and think, do you know what, that's been niggling us for a while, let's get it done now while it's quiet, or while there's nothing going on. Rarely happens, because your work feels to expand the time that you have, doesn't it? So that's why it's important to develop this culture of always thinking about, what can I do better tomorrow? What should I be doing next week? It becomes a mindset. And once that becomes ingrained in people, you find that they'll probably be annoying like me and Sarah and going, well, what about that? Should we do that? Should we do that? Should we do that? You never get a break then, because you can't switch that off once you've started it.
A colleague of mine used to use the phrase, he used to say in organisations, maybe you can't improve something by 100% today, but could you improve 100 things by 1%? And I think that's the switch, that there's not a lot of glory in continual process improvement. Where the glory is in big businesses is when things go wrong and you come in as a knight in shining armour. Never getting things wrong, continually improving isn't where the plaudits are.
Yeah.
But that is the gold dust. It's that small incremental change, and it's putting that mindset into people that they can fix this. But I think when we look at these things that are so massive, I'm all for the A3 approach, when you've got your compass on where you want to go, but you're breaking it down and you're actually doing is constant activity to change, rather than massive meetings of talking about change.
Great. Well, that's I fundamentally agree. We will leave it there. What I've actually done, I've just posted again in the chat contact details for Sarah and Eva, but also myself. If you have any queries, questions, or you want to book in for a quick 15-minute one-to-one with Sarah and Eva, or if you have any feedback from me. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope you found that as sort of useful and insightful as I did. And if, just keep the suggestions coming, keep any thoughts coming. Class dismissed. Thanks for attending, everyone. It was brilliant.
Thank
Cheers.
you.